Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am making a video that I've been wanting to make for about a month now. And it's a video that I feel is somewhat needed because as someone who is making content about the Overwatch League, I feel like it is also important not to hide anything about the Overwatch League and my thoughts and feelings about it. That is, after all, the point of this series. So before we actually get the season underway and we really dive into making all of the weekly predictions and all that kind of stuff, I want to talk about why I am worried about the 2020 season of the Overwatch League. And I know a lot of people are going to point to one thing in particular as a big thing that's going to kill the Overwatch League, and that's the move over to YouTube Gaming. And I don't agree with that. I think that the move over to YouTube Gaming is actually really good for the league for a number of reasons. Starting with the fact that it creates just broader competition among Google and Amazon, or YouTube and Twitch. When it comes to esports, and it's also the big move about the web services, and apparently teams have more money now. So there's a lot of things, but the fact I think is really, really good, and we've seen that esports have grown a lot on YouTube over the past few years. So I think that's a really big thing, and I think it's definitely something of note when it comes to the situation in that move. So I don't actually think that move is bad. There's a lot of other things that I think would kill the league well before a move to YouTube would kill the Overwatch League. My real concerns are in two different departments. Department number one is what we'll start with, because I think it's the easier one to explain, and it's the one that I think is probably the biggest issue that we can see from the outside, and that is the travel. I think the travel, of course, is going to be the big challenge for the 2020 season and beyond, of course. But the thing with the 2020 season is it's the first time this is what's happening. So players are going to have to adjust, and I think there's going to be a number of players who don't finish the season because they don't want to travel, because the travel's too much for them. And it feels like there's so much that's going on, it's such a big burden, that they decide, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that is something that we've seen even last season. We started to see a lot of people retire before traveling began. Now we get to the point where traveling would be 100%. I don't know fully what I'm trying to say, but the idea is, right, when you're traveling, it's very difficult, right? And if you were someone last season who it wasn't a ton of travel that was going on, but you just weren't really enjoying the game anymore, right? You weren't having a good time, then obviously you're going to want to retire. If you have someone who was on the fence in the past, right, about whether or not they wanted to retire, I'd say there's a much higher chance now that they see what's going on and they are going along and they just say, this is too much for me, and they retire. And I think that's a huge problem that I think we could see. And maybe we don't. Maybe it isn't an issue, and maybe the way that the league is run by the fact that they don't have to play all 4 maps when they play a game, and the fact that they will only play every so often. They don't have as many matches per week. Well, they have the same number of matches per week, but they don't play every week, and so even if they're traveling, they don't have as much playtime. I haven't looked fully at the schedule to really say for sure exactly how it works and how it looks. But I know that not every team is going to play every single week, which I think is good, because if you're traveling, you kind of want to have less of a burden on you for that. I mean, there's definitely going to be some weeks where teams play back to back and have to travel back to back, but for the most part, teams aren't playing every week. But I think travel definitely could be a huge problem, and I don't really know how people are going to remedy that, how teams are going to remedy that. Teams are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to, I think, deal with that and really make sure that the travel is something good and something that doesn't completely obliterate the league and all the players. And I'm curious to see how they do it. But I think travel is something simple, and that's something that I think that ultimately the teams have a lot of control over how well it goes. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, you definitely have the problems with teams like London and Paris, where they are the only two teams in Europe, so they're going to be traveling a lot. I'm pretty sure Paris isn't even based out of Paris because it's just not worth it. I think they're in New Jersey. And I don't know where London's based. I don't know if they're in London or not, but that's something where it makes sense just to not base yourself out of Paris, because if you're basing yourself out of Paris, you're kind of making things more difficult for you, because it's going to be much more travel than it would be if you were just in the US somewhere. So it's definitely going to be more difficult, I think, for the teams outside of the US. Though the fact that there's 4 teams in Asia, or 5 teams in Asia, makes it a little bit easier for them, because that's also less travel. Though now they're not traveling there, of course. Well, they'll travel to South Korea, but they won't travel to China because of the coronavirus and all that kind of stuff. But that's a whole other story. That's a whole other thing I could talk about in a different video. But I want to jump into the main thing that I think worries me more than the travel. And the travel is big and whatnot, but it's not the biggest thing to me or for me that I think signals a really bad path for the Overwatch League. And it is a story that we go back to June 1st, 2019 is when this story really started to show itself. And now we're here, and I'm looking at this, and I'm going, oh wow, things are, well, interesting. So back in June, I'll have a link in the description to this article, but I talked about it in Overwatch Weekly back in June. But there's an article titled "Sources: More High-Profile Blizzard Staff Set to Leave Amid Morale Problems." So this is right after Nate Nanzer left the Overwatch League for Epic Games. And this is a story by Richard Lewis, who is a very well-known esports reporter. But this, and it was updated the June 3rd with information that it was confirmation, I believe, of what something happened, but I don't know. I don't know where they put the edit. But the basis of this story was that Pete Lastelica, who is the current commissioner of the Overwatch League, is, or was at the time, running the esports division in a way that people didn't like. So a ton of people who were very high up left, including Kim Fan, who was the global product director of Blizzard Esports, who had been there for over 13 years. Now, they didn't put in most of the names, but they put her in just because she's a well-known figurehead, and her name is very kind of linked with Blizzard Esports. And it was this big deal that someone who was that big and that noteworthy was leaving. And she did leave. She has left. She's no longer with the company. So that was kind of the first sign of things that I was like, ooh, that's kind of a problem. But that was months ago, and then there wasn't really much about it since then. Overwatch League finished, and it just kind of got brushed under the rug. But this problem really kind of rose and came up again at the end of December when Monte Cristo announced his retirement. Of course, he had a string of tweets about why he retired. But one of them in particular was big, which is where he said the departure of Nate Nanzer from OWL led to irreconcilable creative and philosophical differences between myself and the league's current leadership, and all parties will be better served by parting ways. And Monty has talked about this more since then. You know, one of the things he wanted was just to see better content, basically. He wanted the league to focus more on actually like highlighting the players themselves, other than just trying to do other stuff. So Monty's had a lot of different things that he has talked about with this, but he wasn't the only one who said something like this. The other one is Doa, who in his retirement thing said, "It's been a fantastic experience working with my fellow casters, big brain desk people, and the incredible staff of the Blizzard Arena over the past 2 years. But due to some of the league's decisions over the last year in terms of creative direction, management, and resistance to input from veteran esports personnel, I feel it was time for a change." So what is this? What does this say to me? What this says to me is, you have somebody who is currently the commissioner of the league, who doesn't have traditional esports experience. He's someone who comes from Fox Sports. He's someone who comes from traditional sports experience, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. If you're trying to grow the league and make it more accessible to people outside of the esports typical fan base, you're trying to reach people outside of where your audience typically would be, then that's not a problem. But it's a problem if you ignore what makes esports. Because at the end of the day, it's still an esport, and you still have to treat it like an esport. You can try to add traditional sport things to it, and that's fine. But if you're trying to strip away the fact that it's an esport, I think you're creating a lot of problems. And I think Pete Listelica is doing a lot of things to kind of really mess up. Monty has had a lot of different tweets bashing Pete Listelica, ones that I have actually found relatively important. And one of the ones is that in an interview, Pete said something about how they were kind of making like a new talent team, and they were kind of like reimagining what talent was going to be like for the 2020 season. And to do that, they decided, we can't bring everybody back, all this other stuff, blah, blah, blah. And it's just not true. Monty said, "So now Pete Listelica is just lying. All the casters who left OWL had been asked to return to the league, so it wasn't the property's decision, as he suggests here." Tweet followed up by saying, "Imagine being so insecure as a commissioner that you need to take an interview to lie and announce an announcement. You're confident in your product, you just say nothing and then announce your deals when you sign. Pathetic." So there's a lot of reasons that I have some issues and some very questionable opinions about what is going on with the Overwatch League, and it's very, very, very concerning for me. I see all this stuff, and I see that there's legitimately problems within the league, just in terms of making better content, just in terms of making the league better, and it's just such a resistance to listening that I think is really, really bad for the league as a whole, and it's the thing that gives me the most pause, and the thing that makes me the most worried, more than anything else, is that there is just a world where people just do not want to listen. And I think that's really, really bad. I think you can't just ignore the input that you get from the people who have been around for a long time. I think it's very important that you listen to the people who are giving you input, who are telling you, hey, here's what you should do to make this as good as possible. Because at the end of the day, like, these are people who want to see it succeed. And if you're not going to listen to them, right, when they have advice, when they see problems, and you're just going to ignore them, and yes, obviously, right, not everything that people suggest is going to be a good suggestion, right? There are going to be people who suggest something that isn't a good suggestion. But I've seen so many different members and former members now talk about the fact that they've been upset with the way things have done, and they have gone and they have had meetings and they've tried to make cases for why things should be done a certain way. I remember Sideshow talking about the fact that he has specifically had interviews talking about how to make better YouTube content. And if they're moving to YouTube gaming, they really need to have really good YouTube content for the Overwatch League. At the end of the day, there's just a lot of things that I think are very worrisome about the way the league is being run. And if you're going to lose people because they don't like what you're doing, when the person who brought, when a commissioner leaves during the season to go to Fortnite and work on Fortnite and go to Epic Games, that's really, really bad. That's a really bad look. I remember seeing that over the summer and thinking, that's not good. So I think this is a really, really, really worrisome thing. I'm very worried for next season because of this, because I think it really shows that there is stuff going on inside, and it's the thing that has given me the most pause when I think about the season. I'm still super excited for the season. I can't wait for it to start this weekend. It is something that I've been looking forward to since the season ended. But ultimately, I am going to recognize the fact that there are things that make me hesitant and reasons that give me pause, that make me a little worried about what could happen going forward. And I think that is really what I am the most hesitant about with the season. Is I think it's going to be a rough potential season, and I think we're going to have to really hope that things go a lot better than what they seem like they could do on the outside. But those are my thoughts on this whole situation. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments down below. This is a much more serious topic than I normally talk about in videos like this. Normally I just talk about the competition itself. This is more fundamental league things. So I would like to hear what you have to say down below. I think are you worried about this kind of stuff? Do you think it's fine? I'd love to hear what you have to say. But that's all I have for you today. So if you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. But I'm going to get out of here. So I hope you all have a wonderful week and a wonderful day. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.